Get started then. Our first speaker is Adam Asnes, the CEO of Lingoport.
Thanks, Sarah.
Take it away.
Hi, everyone here. Many of you I've met before, some of you I haven't. Appreciate you coming, if you're coming from Oak World, coming a little early. And if there's quite a number of you actually who aren't even going to Oak World, so I appreciate you spending the afternoon with us. Before we get started, I do want to also thank Chris, who had some interesting ideas about this. We were talking about what do we want to do around Oak World, and about 6 months ago we ran an event in Palo Alto where we sort of did this round table for the industry, and we thought it was a really good start. And so our friends in business, Acrolinks, also thought it was a good idea to do this. So we kind of came together and said, hey, let's make an event, but let's look for subject matter that kind of complements everything going on at Oak World or at Unicode or other places. So you go to Unicode for lots of detail on how internationalization works, and really at a very low level how character encoding works. Oak World gives you the localization side of the picture. What we decided would be a really interesting focus is how do you successfully fight the battle that is localization? Because I would say even in organizations who you consider very localization mature, there is still an ongoing battle. And so that's what we're looking to focus on here today. We brought in some great panelists, all of whom we've had a lot of experience together with. And they're pretty deep and experienced in this whole issue of leading efforts through their company. So we'll go and do introductions before the panel, but we've got me, we've got Tex Texin, who's led globalization in companies like Yahoo, NetApp. What was the database company before that, Tex? Progress, thank you. He's currently working at Rearden Commerce. Then we have Richard Faubert. Richard, raise your hand. Way in the back. Richard has been around localization and Cisco for quite a while. He's quite the expert. Having worked very closely with him, I will let you know that he is the very best I've worked with at getting the attention. He's going to see like, no. But he's the very best I've worked with at getting things through, getting things managed in the approval and the organization, and getting the company behind that I've worked with any client. So that's very good. Loic, raise your hand. Loic is here from Intel. Intel has its own globalization group that moves around to all the different areas. Loic has been doing this for 10 years, more? 12 years. And so we put together this group. By the way, they're also Lingoport customers, so you can see a little bit of bias there. And I am very free about that. You know, I will promote what we do a little bit for you, but I'll do it in a gentle way, and it'll be part of the curriculum, I promise. So you're not here for a Lingoport commercial, but there'll be like a special message from the sponsor. All right.
And then the doors are locked, that's okay.
What's that?
The doors are locked, that's okay, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, I was supposed to show this sign when I was going through all this, but this is everybody that's here. I didn't introduce Andrew. Sorry, Andrew. Andrew is the CEO of Acrolinks. How many people here know what Acrolinks is? Oh, a lot of you. Good, good. For those who didn't raise your hands, what Acrolinks does is it actually applies all kinds of technology that we've had for years, but makes it useful right in real time when you're writing documents, and even pointing at things like strings as part of your application. It standardizes the linguistic application of how those documents are written so that it's more easily applied for machine translation or even just human translation with greater reuse and the like. So very valuable change. It goes another step beyond, let's say, traditional translation memory, quite a bit further. All right, and then we have Erin Bank, who you've met, and she's been around this business for quite a while as well. All right, just a little introduction to, this is the commercial part. Little introduction to Lingoport. We've been in business since 2001. We do internationalization services. We also have this tool called Globalizer. Anybody here a Globalizer here? Raise your hand. Good, Chris, you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Chris is in charge of marketing, by the way. So we started as a company doing these internationalization projects, and like a lot of people, we had a bunch of scripts put together to analyze code. I mean, it's kind of overwhelming. If you're in the business of internationalizing other people's code, you've got a serious problem in that you don't know the code. I mean, you're asked to say, what is this going to cost? And you don't know, because you haven't been living with this code for the last bunch of eons. And so you have to point something at the software. Well, that something became a fully fledged product. It became a way that we work with, even our services customers will often use Globalizer as well, because it helps their concurrent business go on as they're building new code, as we're fixing internationalization issues. But we have all this internationalization services that we do, from analysis to actually doing the heavy lifting, building internationalized code for large systems. And then we have this product Globalizer, which you see a couple little portions of the screenshots, but it's a static analysis tool for software. It goes over code, finds internationalization issues. All right, so probably everybody here, because you're all kind of pros, is familiar with this distinction. But I find that when I work with companies, we can talk to we're blue in the face about what the different terms are, that we should always be ready that when somebody says, I need help with software translation, that they don't actually know what they need. They're not using the vernacular. So you always have to have that filter on. And, this is what gets it going. It's really when there's a clear corporate objective to get things done. And you have deal-based initiatives where somebody sold something, and we had a product last year that we internationalized for somebody had licensed their software to be used on the Brazilian stock exchange with board members of that stock exchange, and it didn't support anything but US English. So suddenly there's a big, oh my gosh, and things need to get going. You need to build that product, and you need to have it support. In that case, I think we went fully Unicode, even though they only needed ISO Latin. And get that pumped out and the like as quickly as possible. And you also have the other side of that is, hey, we're a global company. We built the software quickly. It's really taken off now. We need to globalize it. Or, hey, we have a distributed team, and we still are dealing with internationalization issues. So all three problems kind of happen all the time, but Tex will talk about this more. From what we see, it's never because somebody says 60% of your revenue should be, from a global source. I mean, that's a very useful type of thing. It's very useful to say that people prefer to work with software in their own language, but often what gets approved is some kind of a business contract, and the business has to be behind that. All the resources have to be there. There was a very big splash for a product released about 2 weeks ago, the Kindle Fire. Anybody know about the globalization of that product? It's not actually very globalized. So even a big company like Amazon will have business constraints, and they actually have one of the best in the business behind the globalization at Lab 126. And they're a Globalizer customer, but they didn't release a fully globalized product. They're not offering the Kindle Fire all over the world. There might be other business conditions that they're having to do with that, or maybe they want to demonstrate success. And then there's another side to it, that if you talk to developers, you say, guess what, we're going to internationalize. Anybody have a guess on what the response is? It's kind of somewhere around a groan. Developers will go home and they'll think about, in their spare time, and then start writing on their own new features. But you rarely see that for globalization. Even though it's such an impactful thing for a company and a product, it's just not that exciting for developers, for the most part. There are those that really, really like it, but they are actually greatly in the minority, and often, all too often, it's kind of underplayed from, it's considered not real work and localization's problem. And if you ask developers, and they're central to your localization success, is it internationalized? You'll either get yes, even though it's not, oh sure, all we have to do is externalize some strings. Or, next release, we're busy with this little agile sprint and it's not in the requirements, and so we're kind of moving on or whatever. So there isn't a great deal for many organizations. There isn't a great deal of measurement going on. There's not it's like basically catch up. There's like put stuff out and then catch up with international. And if you're a global organization, that has serious implications. If you wait till after development and you've got a big product, it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. A metric you can use is something like, up to a point, sometimes it's like 100,000 per 100,000 lines of code, and then it tails off after a little, quickly after about 250,000 lines of code. But if you've got a big client-server product that has lots of moving parts, it's expensive to do it after the fact, to internationalize. It's just never cheap. Put in opportunity costs, or if your developers are now working on internationalization and new features, it gets a lot more expensive. There's ongoing internationalization. If you've got a product internationalized, but it's always second, you're always catching up with a release. You're always 2 releases behind, 1 release behind. This has a real cost if you have already a revenue source outside the country, and with release delays and lost focus and the like. If you're doing it during development, that's optimal. I mean, that's really the best. But you still have to pay attention. It doesn't happen by itself, and you're going to need a repeated message, repeated ways of measuring. So, along those lines, we took a look at, I got some interesting research data on the teams of today. This is a recent survey done this summer. And it's basically saying what we've kind of observed. There's a lot of large organizations, and particularly, with environments like Rails or Java, you have an emphasis on small teams, but a lot of small teams, all kind of working together. And maybe they're on different, maybe they branch the code all over the place, but you have lots of distributed engineering. And that means that it's actually harder to control the internationalization, because they don't really teach you internationalization in school. There's a lot that can go wrong. So the onus is even more on keeping it up more than it used to be. And then, the other issue is you have like different perceptions in the organization. So you've got to pardon my lousy use of graphics, because I'm not that good at it. But I kind of wanted to, think of different stakeholders in the company. So you have the developers. Hey, internationalization, it's straightforward, it's simple, it's handled. If there's an internationalization issue, I'm going to call it a tier 3 bug, with tier 1 being, hey, the whole thing crashed. Tier 2, some function doesn't work. Tier 3 being, like little stuff, less important. I misspelled something. So, but for the international release, that internationalization issue is, if it doesn't sort, or if you get square boxes or whatever, that's actually a pretty serious issue. That's now at least a tier 2, if not a tier 1, when the software bombs out because you passed a full-size character through it. So you have differences in viewpoints. You have localization managers who are often sort of, I'll dare use the word helpless. There's a couple seats up front, but we'll all have to watch you come up. So localization managers often don't have the technical background to push back. So they're a little out of their expertise. It's actually a little intimidating. You're meeting with these developers that really know stuff, and they did really well in math, and it's kind of intimidating. And then you have business managers who are just like, hey, why isn't it out already? And they want to know, when is it going to be ready? You don't know. So there's a lot of juggling between the parts of the organization. And yes, that in the center is a dashboard that you can get with Globalized. It's called a scorecard that can come with, it's an option in Globalizer that kind of measures the code as it's being done, and it looks at issues. So these are all the problems, but we wanted to be focused on solutions today. So One of the things that I know when our industry is super successful is there's less of a focus on ROI. The fact is that right now, when you're being asked for ROI, nobody asks you for ROI for writing a really nice interface. You know what I mean? I don't have a really good set of words for this, but the fact that going global still is proving ROI is kind of an interesting stage in the development of many software companies. Project cost, what's this going to cost? What am I going to get out of it? That's usually how it's measured. And those project costs are going to determine whether the project goes forward. As a matter of fact, I've seen companies kind of go down because they've said, oh, we absolutely need to go global. Anybody know a company called Quark? Anybody use Quark anytime recently? Well, for years, they were like leaders in their area. They never internationalized. I talked with executives early in the company's history. We probably couldn't have, if we had wanted, we probably couldn't have done it anyway, but it was really early in the company history. I talked with executives at Quark, and they would say things like, if we don't internationalize, it's the future of the company. We're dead in the water. Well, they didn't internationalize. And it's funny, because their developers said, it can't be done. Our application is too big. It'll just overwhelm us for years. So that's a project cost being measured based on a project cost without including the opportunity costs. And so having worked with a lot of different companies going through this battle, I would say one of the keys to success is, yeah, present your project cost, but always go to your opportunity cost, because it's always a much, much bigger number. If the consequence is that you're going to get your butt kicked and your whole sales force in Japan is going to be really underperforming, and the cost of their time, the cost of setting up distribution in these 5 companies is not being properly leveraged, that's a much bigger cost than your development cost, way bigger. The other side is you've got to continually build respect with your developers. If you have a large organization that's seriously faced with a lot of localization, I really think you should have an internationalization expert on board. That person is not necessarily a localization engineer. I have seen this rule be broken many times. There are a lot of exceptions, but generally a localization engineer is used to doing building scripts, doing little tools that turn resource files into something more manageable, that sort of thing. Whereas developers are looking at complex architectures. You've got a database expert that's like, don't touch my database schema, don't touch my code, don't do this. There's a lot of breaking through that. And the only way to get through that is time and deliverable and strong conversation. And if your technical advocate isn't up to it, you'll always be behind. You won't remember, developers are experts. There are these things called like expert organizations. Software developers meant expert organization. You go to Whole Foods. Everybody shop at Whole Foods now and then? Admit it. A few of you. You go there. That is not an expert organization. That is an organization where you're sort of part of the family. There's some austerity there. It's not like that in software. In software, you prove yourself by how good, kind of how much code you can sling and how good is that code. So you've got to relate to that. And you've got to create a plan. That should be the outcome of any internationalization efforts. And I say this because over time, we get asked a lot to do an assessment. And I say, why do you really want an assessment? You don't really want a document that hits the desk hard and say, oh, internationalization, just read it. What you really want is a clear path. It's like going to the store. It's like if I go to the store and my wife hasn't helped me with a grocery list, I'm like lost. And it's the same thing. You've got to have a clear plan of what's going to go on. It has to work within the various different sprints that people do. So I would say, yeah, if you need that assessment document, get it. But the more powerful thing is actually the plan, and then do a findings document. Get to the point. Don't do this like traditional big, I'll date myself by saying Arthur Anderson, but this big report. Do something really compact that can be addressed quickly, and people can get the flow of what has to be done. Get executive buy-in early. That'll take some good push. I mean, executives want to, they have to validate everything, and you'll have to, do the whole money thing and talk a money language. But the reality is if you have executive support, they can give you the money to get it done. They can give you the personnel to get it done. Without money, it's sort of like not having oxygen. You just can't make it. So getting the executive support and continued executive support is going to be important, as is feedback to how you're doing with that money or that initiative and the like, and what's on the line, how you're breaking through. So that success. So again, I trump myself here, but again, is the release being met? Are you on budget? Are you find out how's how do your people in the field, are they having success with the product? Are users reporting a lot of bugs now? Are you creating a value here, and then report that? And of course, a key that we saw early on here was that you can talk about doing things the right way, but again, remember that thing of the teams? If you've got lots of little teams spread all over the place, it's really hard to train everybody. It's really hard for everybody to become an expert. It's sort of impossible. It's a difficult thing. So you know how developers have tools for all kinds of things. Well, we kind of built out Globalized quite a few years ago, and we released it now, and we keep coming up with releases like every 3 months. But Globalizer is an expert system. It finds internationalization in code. It works with lots of programming languages. It has a client-server architecture. Why does it have that? Well, because you got to centralize your expertise. That goes on the server. So your expertise is how you set up Globalizer to work. And it does something called static analysis. Anybody here familiar with that term, static analysis? A few. Okay. The point is if you're just relying on testing, like something like pseudo-localization, now raise your hand if you know what pseudo-localization is. A lot more hands go up. Good, good, good. If you're relying on pseudo-localization, that's actually a really solid thing. Keep using it. But the fact is, if you're pseudo-localizing, you're finding out really, really late in the game. Static analysis looks at the source code. You don't even have to run the application. And it finds the internationalization issues in the source code. And then it reports on that. You can either do that on the desktop, where Globalizer runs on the desktop. You're not submitting your code to a website. And it steps you through, and there's a nice visual interface to all of that. Or you can do it in the black one, which is a lot less exciting looking, but also extremely powerful, where you run it as an automated process, and it generates these reports, and you can see how are you doing on this. And again, you could do it the old way, which is, you kind of write some scripts, you view the pages, you kind of get in this circular pattern of trying to go through the code over and over and over again. Or, don't worry, you don't have to read this. It's like, this is a graphic and process, but I want to use it. Or you could do these sort of, each of those squares on the left is, if you're first faced with an application, is kind of a minimum of 2 weeks each. And they can't really be reused. The idea is you're doing all this code review, and you're kind of going through, and you're looking for everything from strings to what we call locale sensitive methods, functions, classes, depending upon the programming language. That's the stuff that maybe you can't deal with Unicode, or maybe tells a date in a certain way, or maybe sorts wrong, or doesn't pass a locale, or whatever it may be. You have general patterns. That might be hard coding a font into a web page, for instance. That would be a pattern that you want to get rid of. Pointer arithmetic if you're a C, C++ kind of person. Or static file references, maybe pictures, images that have to be found, whatever it may be. You have to kind of cycle through and look for all that stuff in a very manual effort. Or you can do it with Globalizer, build a training rule set, and do it once, and keep doing it, and just update that rule set as you go, as you develop more code. It's just a lot more efficient, because you have something for the life cycle of the product, versus a big, kind of messy process up front. And so that's what I want to talk about here today. The idea of the rest of this presentation is what's been successful. Tex has been doing this in a lot of places as the internationalization guy. Anybody know the site IUTN guy? Fantastic resource. I'm very jealous. It still has the highest. If you type in IA10N, it's still always the first one on Google. I've been trying to unseat him for a few years. I can't do it. This is IA10N, guys. So, all right.
Thanks, Adam. You want to just set me up?
Yeah, sure. You got it.
I'm not sure if I'm happy about the Adam Tex thing, because I don't know about you, but for me it's an image of two guys on unicycles doing...
Well, Unicode, unicycle, is it the same thing?
Thank you. Yeah. And and this is not the audience I expected. I thought we were going to get a bunch of newbies. And sorry. How many of you are kind of new to localization or promoting it in your organization? Glenn, you are not. 3. How many of you have been doing it for 10 years or more? 4. Come on. Okay. All right. So you guys can be telling me what works. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I said that was a loaded question, because I've been doing it for 10 years, yet I'm still working to promote it within my organization.
Okay. But I imagine you have a pretty good idea of what you need to do. And I geared my remarks to people who hadn't done it before. I'm going to try and figure out how this works. Does this work at a distance, or am I pushing the wrong button?
I held it on the table and pushed it down, and it worked. I can't guarantee it's going to work at a distance.
Right button, left button?
Left.
Apparently I'm
It's actually, you got to put it on the table, Tex.
Go close to the table like I did, and lean on the table, and
How
that
about if you go
follows.
How about
If you go beep,
if I go click, you, thank you, Aaron.
you're going to owe me.
That's fine. And so I chose the title, Seeking Approval is Overrated, because I thought I'd make the point that there are times where actually you shouldn't seek approval. And as I look through, I see people heads nodding. And so I'll suggest a few things along those lines. I'm kind of an iconoclast myself, and I like to go outside the guidelines. But then as I look through the presentation, I set it up with a lot of the things that most of you would expect to do. So we'll talk about broaching the idea, some ways to do it, how to make the case, talk about what motivates companies, and I think Adam touched on that in his slides, as having some deals in front of you is a way to go. And what would be a reasonable plan. And I'll give you some tips for your organization. So click, Aaron. Thank you. So for the few newbies in the audience, you're passionate about localization, you're excited about doing other languages. You see other companies are doing this, double their revenue, and you get all charged up, and you run up to your CEO and you go, look, we could be like the big guys. Double our revenue, 60% of Microsoft, 60% of Yahoo, 60% of Google, Facebook. Those guys go global, and look what it does to their money. Let's do it. Enthusiasm is good, but it's not really going to get you very far. Because your CEO, or whoever you're talking to, your manager, is going to go, I appreciate your passion, but what I'm thinking is, well, I have to set up sales offices, support offices, there's business issues around this. Stick with what you know. They might not say it to you, they say, yeah, I'm going to think about it, and please go and finish doing what you're doing. But it's not going to get you very far. So there's the second best way, click, and that is to work for one of those companies. They've got tremendous funding, they've got a massive cash cow, and an egomaniacal CEO. Because if you go to him with that approach, you go, world domination? Yes! Let's do it. Go for it. Throw some money at you. That's a nice way to go. That's the second best way. The best way, of course, we went backwards.
How strange is this?
Joke's not that funny. You got to keep it moving there.
This is not my laptop. I'm not the one who doesn't know how to read the mouse.
We're going to trade barbs. So the best way is to be an egomaniacal CEO with lots of funding. Took too long to get there. Let's go to the next one. So, and the other way is to be strategic about it. This is what most of you are expecting. Do some compelling arguments, have some counter arguments for the obvious objections. Think about your audience. When you're talking to an engineer, you're going to talk about some things. You're talking about the QA folks. You talk to the sales guys. You talk to the product managers. Speak their language. Talk to the CEO. Have to speak their language, right? This is what you're all doing, those of you that have done this. I like an interactive. Boy, that one joke that we waited for, that just kind of killed everything. Now, let's make this interactive. If not for your amusement, for my amusement. You can comment or ask questions. But you really have to change your tone and change your content for the audience, and specifically change your language. Because if you're talking about internationalization to the sales guy, as Adam alluded to, doesn't make a difference. When you're talking to sales, to the engineers, it turns out it also doesn't make a difference, and we'll come back to that towards the end of the presentation. Change your language, know who you're talking to. Vision is good. It's nice to say, you know, we can double our revenue, but you want to have achievable first steps. We'll talk about that. And you want to focus on steps that have an immediate ROI. Not ROI the way Adam was talking about. You do this big, massive plan. You're trying to figure out how the whole business can be successful. Pick a few steps that you can have a win in that gets you advanced just a little bit. Even if it's not entirely getting into another market, but moves it forward, gets internationalization forward, gets localization a little bit more forward. And even if it doesn't get you into another market, it gets you some other capabilities that are considered a win, and you've advanced your cause. We'll talk about that. Actually, I've got a couple of examples up here. Often when you do internationalization, it fixes some problems, even for your U.S. customers. Some of the character corruption that you see, because people are still referring to 8859-1, sorry to get geeky on it. This is the wrong encoding name. You can fix some of those bugs where the trademark symbol doesn't work, some of the smart quotes don't work. Work on some of those. And what about features like personalization? Every company wants to have some level of personalization or white labeling for their product. Well, everything you do for internationalization and localization also helps with those features. If you can focus on some of the aspects that give you wins immediately in your business and also moves you towards being global, you'll get approval, you'll be able to go ahead. Any of you have done that? Only one? I know some of you, a couple more have. At least give me some hand motion here. All right. For one company, when you're starting out with internationalization, it's always the first time you look at everything you need to do. It's a massive project. You change the database, you change your code. Every line of code has to deal with the character encoding issue. It affects everything. And one company said, you know what? Let's just start on the database, because if I make the database so it supports multiple languages, we were in a couple countries, but each database, the database for each country had to be separate. I can't fix the UI problem yet, but if I fix the database, which is the first step, actually I can consolidate all of the storage in one database. I can now at least do a financial report, because it doesn't care about users' names, it only cares about financial data. I consolidate in one database. Now I can do a worldwide report for some of the customers that now had all their information stored in one database, even though the application, the middle tier, the UI was separate. Still needed to be separate because it didn't have the encoding support. But we had the benefit that now we could consolidate the databases, reduced management, reduced overhead, got some efficiencies back, and got reports that we couldn't otherwise get, except for collating by hand. So look for those kinds of wins as you look at everything you need to do. Okay, thank you. What is a compelling argument? It is not a compelling argument to point out that you can double your revenue. It just isn't. Your company, your CEO, your sales folks are going to look at that and say, first of all, there's all the costs, there's all the things I have to do to the business, but also, I don't know if that's my business. I don't know if the rest of the markets that I go into actually can use my application if they need my services. And if you look deep down in your hearts, you should be wondering about that too. You have a dependency maybe on desktops or on the web and other markets. People are using mobile phones. They don't have the same kind of internet access. Maybe it's not the same for another company. So you can't just throw out that number. You have to look for how it applies to your business. Compelling argument is where you look at the kinds of demographics of your users, the types of environments they have, whether or not they do business the same way, whether it's relevant. So it should be specific, should be relevant, should be logical. You can't always make them irrefutable. No argument is really irrefutable, but you want to anticipate objections and maneuver the discussion so that at least you have a way to deal with the objections. Make sense? Right? Relevant, I wanted to make sure to highlight, has to be applicable in your business context. Now, I shouldn't say I've been doing this for so many years, but the first at least decade, as I was trying to advance my cause, internationalization, I went looking around for data. Every company I talked to for the business they were in, I'd say, let me go, of course it must be out there. What are people doing in other countries? How many of you tried to find data? How many of you have been successful at actually finding data? Don's got a research company,
Yeah.
so he'll say yes.
Yeah.
I challenge you to go ask him for the data, even if it's expensive. Make him cough it up. It's really hard. It's usually not for your business. It's not exact. It's not detailed enough. It's not compelling. It isn't really out there. It just isn't. Because by the time it's out there, there's companies in those markets taking care of the business. Now, I'm sorry, Don. You can, at the end, you can challenge my challenge. But the types of things people do is they look at competitors in the market, maybe not your American competitors, but look, see if they're competitors in that market. You look for similar businesses, try and create analogies, and then you're going to create a comprehensive plan with ROI. Right? Good luck with that. I don't think it's easy to do. My thoughts on business plans, it's kind of the same. I don't know if you've taken any training in public speaking. First thing, and it's also like learning how to write. When you're a kid, they tell you to stand straight, speak softly, don't move. When you're presenting, boom, get out there, walk around, wave your hands, everything you've been taught not to do. When you go to college to learn all these polysyllabic words, and you write down on your paper, this is really expansive stuff, and then when you graduate college, you go into business, they go, would you write like an 8th grader, because that's all we understand, and that's the only way to motivate people. Same thing with business plans. If you're not the product manager, you're a localization manager, you're an internationalization engineer, don't try to do that. Do a general case, sure. Don't get caught up in the details, because you're out of your league, and it'll get challenged. Cover some of the basics. Go next, please. And by itself, when you hand it in, it won't get you that far. Because you're not going to have all of these other business costs. Unless you're including, well, in Japan, you have to have a joint venture. In China, you have to have a partner. In these other countries, we're going to set up sales offices. How much does it cost to set up a sales office? Even if you think you're a web company, you have to do some things to provide for sales. You have to deal with the legal issues. You have to have some kind of an entity and representation. You have to think about, how do I get currency out of a country? It's not like, you just set up a bank account, people make deposits, and you're moving money back and forth. you're going to think about the stuff you know, and the rest of it you're going to have difficulty estimating. Allude to it. Come up with the portion of the plan you understand. Hit the counter-argument up front. Say, look, I'm not the business guy. I can tell you what we need to do. I can tell you about some of the costs. There's stuff in here I don't know. You guys supply that. But look, this is the general trend for the case. This is as far as I can take it. Otherwise, it just gets dismissed as being incomplete. Say, I know it's incomplete, but there's enough here. We should do something with it. And as Adam mentioned, what really works is when you have a sale in front of you. You know, if you work for the really big companies, they make the commitment. I used to hear Microsoft talk, and they'd come out and say, here's how you motivate your company, and it's, we put this plan together, and of course you want to have global, worldwide domination, you just do it. Well, that works for a handful of companies, maybe more than a handful in Silicon Valley, but not most of them. You're a medium-sized enterprise, small enterprise. When do they go global? When the sales guy's already sold something, as Adam mentioned, or when somebody's in the door making requests. So what do you have to do? You have to think about that. Don't tell the sales guy, go ahead and sell it. That's a thought. Don't do that. But when you talk to go throughout the organization, talk to the sales guys, talk to the marketing guys, are you getting requests? Are people asking? Please write it down. Don't dismiss it. I know we can't sell it today, so you ignore it and you don't bother with the request. You know, but when you start writing down some of the silly requests they make because you're looking to defend the fact you can't make the sale, which is what sales guys do, right? They record some of the things that prevent them from going forward. So would you also write down, they ask about international, because if we do that, you'll have more sales. We can do more for you. If they're not asking, find out why. And if you've got customers that are Fortune 500 customers, or at least global 500 customers, find out why they're not asking for your product in other markets. Why isn't the demand there? Because that's obvious. Not only is it obvious, but you should be asking to motivate your case, well, geez, if our big global 100 customer is using us, and they find out a competitor works in more markets than we do, will we be able to keep them as a customer? Oh, we've got to worry about that. Because we have competitors, and they might be moving into other markets. Focus on business drivers, things like that. Be specific, don't get too detailed, capture data points. You do what you can to support your case. And I can tell you there are some difficulties. One is the corporate Kool-Aid. I was over in Taiwan, and I'm talking to one of our sales offices. This was many years ago. And at the time, said, look, we're moving our documentation to being online. It tells you how far back it was. Wouldn't it be great if we translated our documentation? And I'm talking to the head of the office there. I thought for sure he'd go, oh yeah, great. And he says, no, for our product, we're talking to developers, we don't need that. So we don't need that. How can you say that you don't need it? Wouldn't it be better, the information would be more clear? And he says, no, here in Taiwan, we're very proud of our educational system. And everybody speaks English, and it's an excellent system. And I'm thinking, you know, half of the emails or faxes, as it were, at the time, that we exchange, I have to ask the question 3 times, because I'm not sure if we're really having clear communications. And I was in the office for about a week. And at the end of the week, I went back to him and I said, you know what? I know you have a good educational system. But I'm watching, because I'm in the office and you can see everyone in the office. That guy right there is your English speaker. Because everyone in the company, when they have a question about our product, they go over and they ask him, and he looks it up in the manual and relates it to them. He says, so if you had translated documentation, This guy could be free to do more work. And he's a really good engineer, but mostly because he's the one who's reading the book all the time. The other guys are struggling to figure out what it says. They were fine to talk baseball with, right? English was good enough for that, but when you have technical documentation, accuracy, precision is important, it didn't work. Even so, he agreed, but he wouldn't make the case. Because the corporate Kool-Aid had been for so long, we don't need it. He didn't want to challenge that. He wasn't going to fight it. He's going, I'm not going to be the guy who's going to make the case that actually what we've been saying for so many years is not true. Find somebody else to make the case. Can't fight that. So you have to think about which battles are worth fighting. If there's another way to maneuver it, you're not going to get support in some of the areas where you think it should be obvious. Go ahead, Tom.
We worked with one company a few years ago that had a very similar problem. What they did was survey sales and marketing, and they found out that around the organization, they were spending in non-English speaking countries 15% of their time translating, interpreting things for clients. And it would have cost several $100,000 to translate the materials, but to translate the materials also freed up 15% of sales and marketing time to get out there and actually sell more stuff. So it's arguments like that that can be backed by empirical data rather than just contention.
Right. That's what you have to find out, is where the costs are and how you're going to make them explicit. And now, I'm fortunate. Companies I worked for, they let me travel and visit these offices so I could actually see and be hands-on. If you're not traveling, you're not going to be able to get that opportunity. When people come and visit you, you can pose the questions, but you can't really see what's going on, so it's really hard. But you have to keep talking to people and asking questions and thinking about where it might pose an obstacle so that you can be successful. Back up, please. Thank you for that. So there are some difficulties. The hardest one is you want to get data, and the customers that come to you, they look at your website, it's in English. Stop right there, they walk away. The only customers who are pursuing you, if you're an English-only company, are the ones who either need your product because they can't go anywhere else, they have some other motivation, they're willing to deal with the fact that it's English-only. Maybe in their company, English is good enough. Okay? They're willing to deal with it, they work with other businesses. So they're not the ones that you can get the argument that it would be helpful, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Right? You have to kind of reach out and find some customers. They're not already customers, but they've somehow dismissed you or in the process of dismissing you, and that's really hard to do. One of the ways to do that, to counter that, is to have a mock-up. Have something where you can say, all right, it's not the product, we're thinking of doing this. Would this make a difference to you? If you can get something that you can show people, and you can get people who are willing to show it, well, then you can start to get some data. In the world of the web, where you have A/B testing, you might also be able to do some things that we couldn't do in the past. You might think about that. Okay, so a lot of people, they're excited, and they have this idea, and they go and they say, shouldn't we do this, and why don't you guys start doing it? Well, everyone goes, yes, but I'm really busy, it's not going to happen. So you need to lead the way. And there's a couple of things you can do to lead the way. I mentioned mock-ups. One of my favorite things is a skunkworks. Do you all know what a skunkworks is? Not everyone. You got some money you set aside in your budget for whatever, some resources you've tucked away in case of an emergency. Apply some of that to moving forward in areas in your own domain. Don't announce it as a project. Don't tell anyone. Grab someone and say, look, why don't you talk about this a whole lot to help me do this? Make a mock-up or change one screen, change a few pages. Let's have something we can show people and then we can get them excited. Like in one company, I needed an international lab for testing. And when somebody left, I grabbed some of his old equipment before IT could grab it, and I moved it into the office. And I started using it as an I-18N lab. I reconfigured it. And it was about a year later, in 6 months I said, I need to replace these machines. It's my I-18N test. People looked at me and said, oh, okay. So they upgraded me. A year later, one of the admins came around and said, what is this? And somebody steered them to me, and they said, what is that? And I said, that's the I-18N lab. He goes, oh, well, we need a sign. And then it became instantiated, right? So that's a... don't everyone try that, but that's one way to do it. Do some testing on your potential customers. Okay, we're getting to the...
Minus 3 minutes. Talk backwards.
Keep going. But you're moving, I think you moved backwards. All right, back one. Let me just see, where am I? So, I think we've covered most of these things. Immediate first steps, things in your domain, in your sphere of influence. Lead the way by what you will do, not necessarily what you're asking others to do. Since we need to wrap up, I'll move to the next slide. A couple of tips for developers and QA folks and managers. Developers hate internationalization. When you talk to developers, first of all, you have to understand how they get their job satisfaction. Developers don't work for money. Developers work because they like the end result, right? So they change something, they get it to work, it shows up on the screen, and it makes them happy. When they see it beep or whatever it does, that's their idea of pleasure. Money's nice, but you have to keep paying them a lot. I'm not suggesting you don't. But then you say, I'd like for you to change the date format, make it go day-month instead of month-day. And, oh, I can do that. He does it, and he looks at it, and he says, it's wrong. It doesn't feel good because it doesn't look right to me. I don't like doing this. And if you say, can you make it show Japanese characters? And they say, well, okay, I do it. And they go, oh, God. I can't read it. I don't know if it's right. I really don't care about this stuff, and I don't like working on it. Absolutely no job satisfaction. And along the way, I'll mention, because Adam touched on it, says you have trouble dealing with developers and they're intimidating. The other truth about developers is when you ask them for an estimate, if the estimate is on something that's fun, I could do that in a weekend. Something I don't like doing? Oh, man, let me tell you about all the issues with that, how hard it is, and that's going to just take months. So you do need someone with a little bit of expertise to know to apply through that, get the estimate down, or you just need to push on them and say, you know what, you can do better because you're a smart guy. Figure out a way to make it cost the same as this other thing because that looks similar, and you get the estimate down. Now QA people, nobody ever talks to the QA guys. These guys like to generate bugs, and nobody ever comes to them and says, here's the new feature, I'm going to tell you all about it. And would you please find bugs? But if you go to them and say, let me talk to you about internationalization. And I've done this in some of the organizations here. And you talk to the QA guys, say, you know what? This is a date format, this is a number format, here's how you do pseudo-localization. Would you? And they're thrilled. Nobody's ever come and talked to us before. I like this stuff. Oh, and here's the 10 things you need. You can go out and find bugs. The next day, there's 100, 200 bugs written up by the 20 guys you talk to. They love it. Oh, date here, date there, it all doesn't work. Now the engineers have some job satisfaction. They've got 200 bugs in their queue, and they get satisfaction by pulling the list down. Doesn't matter they don't like what they're doing. Well, it does matter, but they'll get that queue down. So, talk to the QA guys, give them some attention and some respect, and pull the developers along. For execs, I strongly recommend a dashboard. Globalized is a good tool for finding all of the bugs and statistics. You create a dashboard that says, by the way, for your division, here's what you need to do for internationalization. This many problems for Unicode, this many problems for dates, this many problems for these functions, pseudo-translation errors. For one, the executives don't like when they see a lot of red marks in their score. They're really competitive. The guy who's green will be going around smoking cigars and blustering about how great his division looks, and the guy who's red's going to be royally ticked, and he's going to drive his chief architect, make stuff happen, right? So, get some metrics, get a dashboard. Don't worry about how specific you get. Just get something up there, and then you can continue to expand it. Okay?